Now then, Vinyl Monkey here, 1969. Well, as I said last time and the time before, this is going to get increasingly harder as I work my way through the 60s and into the 70s, because just the amount of classic brilliant albums coming out at that time, and also that I happen to have in this collection, is just phenomenal. So I could have easily done, I have whittled it down to 10. It's been agonising. I could have equally had another credible, plausible 10, or 3 plausible top 10s out of this collection, but I haven't. I've whittled it down. You might say, well, why didn't you just do a top 30 then? Well, for two good reasons really. One is I don't think anybody would really want to listen to me rambling on for that long, and secondly, for some technical reasons beyond my ken, my camera will only run up to about 18, 19, at a push 20 minutes for some reason, so I would never be able to get through that many, so I better get cracking as it is. But as I say, impossible, absolutely impossible. In 1969, some of the big beasts were of rock and jazz and folk were putting out albums, the Beatles, Abbey Road, the Stones, Let It Bleed, Simon and Garfunkel, and Dylan's Nashville Sky, lots of great albums, and some of those I've discounted out of my top 10, but others I haven't included because I've only got them on CD. That's the Beatles and Stones, and Miles Davis, of course, in a Silent Way, absolutely landmark jazz album, but I've only got that one on CD at the moment, so they're not even included. And I've had to these are just some of the examples of the ones I put to one side. Brilliant albums, Archie Bell and the Drills, brilliant Northern Soul stuff. The great British blues band 10 Years After with their great album Shh. The Moodies had 2 albums out in that year, and they're not included. The supergroup Blind Faith, with their controversial record cover, great album but not included in my top 10. The Beach Boys had a good album out in 1969, that's not included. I've included a couple of country albums, but I haven't included Bob's country album, because it just didn't quite reach it, Bob, although I do love the album. I think it's fantastic. This is superb. Joni Mitchell's Clouds, arguably better than the one I included last week in 1968's title, but I think Joni will be back anyway, so probably for that reason I've left it out of the top 10. And Santana's debut album, stunning album, but again I think we might see them in subsequent years, so I've left loads and loads of other good albums out as well, so apologies to anybody who wanted to see those included, and I'll get straight on to my top 10. And at number 10, this is Jerry Jeff Walker, Drifting Way of Life. And Jerry Jeff Walker is was a country orientated folk singer. He started off in the Greenwich Village folk scene, and then he did genuinely become a drifter. He busked all over America, from Florida right across to California, for about 6 years, just drifted about busking, till he settled in this sort of Austin, Texas outlaw sort of country folk scene, and he got along with some of those country singers, and this is just I think this is his second album, but it's a lovely, absolutely simple country folk album. I love the song Morning Song to Sally, No Roots in Rambling, just absolutely lovely. It was only recorded in a day or two. It's really nicely played, it's got a lovely feel. It's just very, very nice and easy to listen to. I keep going back and back to it. So my number 10, Jerry Jeff Walker, Drifting Way of Life. My number 9, now this band had 2 albums out in this year, so I could have included either of them because they were both brilliant. This is actually their second album, and this is Free by the British rock blues band Free. There they are on the back, probably not able to see them. Paul Rodgers, Paul Kossoff, Andy Fraser and Simon Kirke, of course, on drums. And this is, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's slow, it's spacious, it's beautiful, it's soul, blues, rock. Paul Kossoff is in superb form on lead guitar on this album, all the way through it. And I mean, the opening track, I'll Be Creeping, is one of my favourite blues rock tracks of all time. But also love Lying in the Sunshine, where Andy Fraser sort of plays almost a lead sort of bass line all the way through it, and Roger's soulful voice is just gorgeous. So beginning to end, really gorgeous album, and that's my number 9 from 1969. My number 8 is Jimmy Cliff. This is his second album. Great songs, Many Rivers to Cross you'll be familiar with, Wonderful World, Wonderful Beautiful People, the protest song Vietnam, which Dylan once described as the greatest protest song ever in his opinion. These are just all great songs. It's a collection of great songs which deal with some really tough themes, but he sings about them with such a positivity and a determined sort of pragmatism that he's going to get through those. So Many Rivers to Cross, of course, Hard Road to Travel, Suffering in the Land. It's just about poverty, about racism, about how tough he expects life to be, but he's going to go for it. And he's just, this power of his own personal agency sort of shines through this stuff and makes it a brilliant album to listen to. And all of that is set against a sort of relatively light, accessible reggae theme that really opened up a lot of ears to reggae music, I think. So that's my number 8, Jimmy Cliff. My number 7 is Jethro Tull's second album, Stand Up, with the great pop-up cover on the inside there. And this is the album that, for me, it really, it followed on from their debut album, This Was, but this one really set the scene for that sort of unique sound, that fusion of rock, blues, folk, prog. It made them different sounding to any other band that was around at that time. And this was Martin Barr. This was the new guitarist featured for the first time in Jethro Tull on this album. And just brilliant songs. Again, one of those albums that's great, strong songs from beginning to end. I particularly love A New Day Yesterday, Back to the Family, Nothing Is Easy, the opener on side 2, brilliant, and We Used to Know. But, I could have picked any of those songs. A really, really strong album. And that's my number 7, Jethro Tull, Stand Up. My number 6 is a country album. Now, I know many people might sort of be tempted to sort of dismiss country, as sort of redneck attitudes, cliched songs, corny stuff, but it doesn't need to be like that. And Merle Haggard certainly wasn't like that. Merle Haggard was right up until he died, definitely the real thing. This is Pride in What I Am, which I've got about half a dozen Merle Haggard albums, and I think this is my favourite one. But there are other strong albums as well. But this one, it's that theme. He had a famous single, Okie from Muskogee, which people couldn't work out whether is it about pride in being from Middle America and being a bit of a redneck, or was it partly tongue-in-cheek? And it was never ever totally clear. But this is following some of those themes. He's had a hard life, Merle Haggard. He lost his dad when he was a kid. He went way off the rails. He was in and out of Borsals. He was in prison. He learned to play the guitar, I think, after he'd seen a Lefty Frizzell concert, but he really decided to get into music when he was serving time in San Quentin prison, and he seen Johnny Cash perform there, and it made him want to join the prison band and take on a career in music from there. But he writes nearly every song on this album, and they're just brilliant songs. And the backing band, the Strangers, there they are on the front, a really tough looking crew, just really, really superb. The standout tracks for me, the title track, I Take a Lot of Pride in What I Am, which opens it. And then The Day the Rains Came, stunning song, I think, absolutely stunning. A bit strange and stuff, but it's really, really good. So, country or not, that is a superb album from 1969. Merle Haggard's Pride in What I Am is my number, I think I'm up to number 6. My number 5, bloody hell, what an album this is. This is the Chicago Transit Authority. This is the band that at this point were called Chicago Transit Authority, but they had to change their name, shorten it to just Chicago. Just after this, there was a 7-piece band. There's the band members there, which were sort of formed of pretty much a 4-piece sort of hard rock band alongside a 3-piece sort of jazzy brass section, and it's that fusion of that hard rock with searing electric guitar up front and jazzy sort of brass, brilliant horn section that makes this just absolutely unique. And from the first track, really, you get into that sort of the grooves and the funk and the superb stuff. And it's a double album, which is really unusual for a debut album, I think. But I mean, I think they went on. I lost interest in them really fairly quickly, because I think I detected them getting a bit too soft for me. It was getting more towards easy listening, and I may be doing them a huge disservice because I haven't got their follow-up albums to this. I remember hearing them in the early 70s and not being particularly impressed, but this is a stunning album. The standout tracks on it, I don't know, I wouldn't know where to start. The whole of side 1 and side 2, really, from introduction to Poem 58, just absolutely brilliant. And then on side 3 and 4 they go way left field, and particularly with freeform guitar, which is some critics I've read that say this is almost unlistenable. You know, is it sort of brave, or is it self-indulgent or avant-garde or whatever? I mean, I'd err towards brave, particularly on a debut album, but I quite like it. And I think as a whole double album, it really does stand up. One of my favourite albums, I think, of all time, Chicago Transit Authority. My number, what am I up to? 5. My number 4, again a landmark album. This really did change things. This is Isaac Hayes, great photo on the front of his bald head. Hot Buttered Soul, Isaac Hayes' second album, backed by the brilliant band the Barkeys, who had backed Otis Redding and lots of the Stax label performers. They just had to put the band together. They'd lost about 3 or 4 members of the band the year previously in a plane crash, which also killed Otis Redding. So they'd reformed the band, and here they backed Isaac Hayes absolutely brilliantly. And what makes this different? Yeah, well, soul music up until then, I suppose you could say a lot of it was maybe a bit, you know, on the manufactured side, some of the Motown stuff, or on the theatrical side or whatever, but this really just opened the door for what was going to come, I think, or what was possible in the early 70s. 4 songs only. Only one of them written by Isaac Hayes, although he is a great songwriter and musician in his own right. But his first one, a brilliant version, perhaps a definitive version of Bacharach's Walk On By, which Dionne Warwick had the hit with. I can't decide whether I love this version or the Stranglers version the most, but I think it's this one probably. Followed by one that I can never pronounce, Hyperbolic Syllabalesquic Delamistic, I don't know how you say all that. A 10-minute song written by Hayes. That's a great song, some brilliant jazzy keyboard stuff in there as well. And then a sort of bit more of a soul crooner, you know, a typical sort of smoochy sort of song, open side 2, only 5 minutes, shortest song on the album, but then followed by 17 minutes of Jimmy Webb's By the Time I Get to Phoenix, which is absolutely stunning. I can just listen to that over and over again, and it starts with an 8-minute monologue. I think there's one note on a keyboard faintly, and then a cymbal being sort of struck very slowly, and Isaac Hayes just talking, which is about setting the scene for why this guy is driving off to Phoenix, what has happened before, what has gone wrong there, and he's just talking through that. But it's really dramatic. It's great stuff. It's different, unique, brilliant. Hot Buttered Soul, my number 4. My number 3, well, again, what a bloody album. Again, landmark album, changed things, opened doors. This is In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. This is their debut album. And, well, a lot of people might be familiar with the opening riffs of the opening track on this. The opening track, of course, is 21st Century Schizoid Man. Those terrifying riffs, terrifying lyrics, what is it? Cat's foot, iron claw, neurosurgeons scream for more, at paranoia's poison door, 21st Century Schizoid Man. Yeah, I won't do it because I'll do it a total injustice, but oh, what a track. And if you I don't know if you're not familiar with that, if you're not for any reason, and you want to look it up, look up the live version. They played a gig in Hyde Park back in the Rolling Stones, a free concert, more than 500,000 people there, and I think these were going on first. They were unheard of at the time. It was before this album had come out, nobody had heard of them, and they opened up with that song, and it is absolutely, I think it took the 500,000 or 1 million breaths away, really. And that, and the closing track, which is The Court of the Crimson King, absolutely stunning. I probably would have had this album higher, but the middle tracks, they're not that many, the 3 middle tracks, including the sort of 12-minute Moonchild, sort of space jammy, spacey, proggy sort of stuff, are probably not my cup of tea, really, but they're beautifully done. As I say, opening the doors for prog rock, for good or bad, but a great album, a landmark album. My number 3, King Crimson. My number 2 is Frank Zappa's Hot Rats. This is Zappa's, I think it's his second solo album after his band The Mother's Invention, I think it broke up at that time. This is just brilliant jazz rock fusion with absolutely superb musicians, particularly Frank Zappa himself on lead guitar. Really weird sort of cover, which I think is great. And maybe one of the reasons why this is my favourite Zappa album is that there aren't many lyrics and there's no Zappa singing on it. The only lyrics and singing is done by his friend Don Van Vliet, Captain Beefheart. The brilliant second, it is the second track, isn't it? Yeah, Willie the Pimp. And I think there's something about some of Zappa's lyrics and singing that sort of, I don't know, it puts me off a little bit, but I think this is Zappa at his best. The music is absolutely superb. It's complex, yes, but it is really, really catchy as well. I mean, particularly the impossibly catchy Peaches en Regalia, the opening track on side 1. So, absolutely brilliant album, Hot Rats by Frank Zappa, along with his friend Captain Beefheart, my number 2. Which leaves my number 1 for 1969, and this is another band that had 2 albums out in this year. They had their debut album and then they followed it up with this, Led Zeppelin 2. And I could have, and maybe many would argue, should have had both of those albums in any top 10 from that year. The debut album was certainly an absolute cracking album, but I've always preferred this one. If you want to look at my top 10, my top ranked Zeppelin albums, you'll see I've got this at my number 1, which is partly, I don't know, it's maybe nostalgia because this is the one I actually heard first, and it just got into my head. I think for blues rock it is the perfect album, from the brilliant opening Whole Lot of Love, which is just absolutely stunning, to the closing great blues Bring It On Home. Every single song on here is a cracker and a classic, even including the Moby Dick drum solo. I just think it epitomises the subtlety and shade and light and dark and heavy and light and folky and rocky, and you know, it the best of Led Zeppelin, really. So that's my number one from 1969. I think there's plenty to argue with in there. Comments welcome, suggestions welcome for any cracking albums that I haven't referred to at all today. And thanks again for listening, watching. Yeah, thank you. Cheers.